So today what we'd like to do is take you through a business intelligence task. Now typically when it comes to business intelligence development, the tool set is reasonably limited. It's not to say that it's a poor tool set, but we just get to the point where we accept what we have and get on with the job that we have to do. But we don't feel that it should stop there. We feel that some of our SQL development tools can be used to support you in your role throughout business intelligence development. So the typical business intelligence developer, which is a big mouthful, so I'm now going to refer to BIDS, which is how it's going to remain for the rest of the talk. That is the tool set that's provided, and that's it. There's nothing more, there's nothing out there that you can use in your day-to-day work to get things done. Today we're going to look at a typical ETL task, and I think Naomi is going to tell us a little bit more about exactly what that is.
So, sorry, I feel like I need to sing or something. So how are you doing? How are you doing today? Good? Yeah? How many BI developers are in the room today? Oh, lots. Very good, very good. So today we're going to see a very simple task. I'm sure some of you have done this many times, and there are other ways of doing it. We're just going to cover a very simple one, because we want to show you how you can benefit from the tools to actually make that part actually very easy. So the example today would be to create a data mask based on some information from AdventureWorks, and it's based on the integration services package, and it would be moving data from one place to another. And obviously the aim would be that we want to actually build a cube on it. So in this example, there is a couple of notes that I would like to make. So we'll be using the star schema approach. We would use already the Snowflake if it would be a bit more complex, but in this case we'll use the star schema approach. And we'll assume that our staging database would be AdventureWorks. So before I start into the details of the example, I'm just going to cover very quickly what the BI system should look like, theoretically. So normally I have a much smaller screen, but normally we have quite a different set of data sources. They could be Oracle, SQL Server, they could be files, they could be web services, they could be, I don't know, you name it. And normally we have some sort of integration services package that will move that data into our staging database. And then we'll normally have another package that will be transforming that information into our star schema or Snowflake schema for our data marks. So in the example today, we'll be covering either in here or in here, as long as you have SQL Server in both ends. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, here you go. So the example would be a bit of data around orders that is available in AdventureWorks. So hopefully you've just spoken to your clients, customers, users in the company, and you've identified the measures that you want to have and probably the dimensions that you would like to slice that information for. And so in this case, we have the amount of money we paid in the orders, how many orders we've had, and then the number of items in those orders. And then, as I mentioned, we've identified the country for shipping address, the date that the order was placed, product category, product and salespeople, and sales territory. So obviously this is very easy when we see it on this screen. Normally that takes a lot of conversation to actually understand what sort of questions they would like to make to that data. But in our example, this is kind of the layout we want to achieve. So now we've identified what information we need for our customers. So Tom, I think you're going to tell us how we can do that.
Yeah, so first of all, what I'd like to do is just sort of address a few of the areas that we're going to go through today. So there's many areas that we feel our tools can help, but today we're going to be focusing on these 5. So discoverability, versioning, coding, visibility, and lastly deployment. So I guess the first one, discoverability, it's important that we define exactly what we mean by that. And by discoverability, what we mean is how easy is it to find the source of the information that you're looking for when you're trying to extract some particular data. How simple and quick and easy is it for you to get to that? So for our presentation today, we thought we'd start with a database that was reasonably familiar to people, so we picked AdventureWorks. But we quickly discovered that, in fact, it's not quite that simple to track through the relationships of the objects within AdventureWorks to find the information that you're looking for. So we need a way to give us an overall picture of the database, and then to be able to drill down into the database to actually see those objects and those relationships. And this is a prime case for our tool SQL Dependency Tracker. So SQL Dependency Tracker is a tool that allows you to visualize your database, the objects and the relationships between those objects, and actually move through those relationships to the source of the data that you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all started up. Do you want to tell us exactly what we're looking for?
Yes, so in this part, we need to discover those tables, and I'm sure all of you know how wonderful documentation we can find from our database developer. Is everything available, all diagrams everywhere, we know what the tables are, which is not precisely the case for me. So normally you actually have to find your way through the tables and try to understand what logic is actually in there. So in this example, what we'll do is, on the dimension that we saw in the matrix earlier, it was the country table, well, the country dimension. So we'll try to navigate our way from the sales information to the country to identify the dimension table, and also the joining conditions to the sales table, so we can actually then end up building the fact table. So I think you've got the tool loaded.
I have. And so one thing I would like to mention at this point, I've loaded it up. SQL Dependency Tracker is a completely standalone tool. But just recently we actually integrated it into Management Studio as well. So although I've loaded it separately, what I could have done is gone to the database in the Object Explorer, right-clicked, and then view dependency diagram. Just click there. But I wanted to show you it right from start, right from loading. So I've opened it up. This is the screen that greets you. And we're going to go ahead and add objects to our project. So at this point, we can select our server, and we select the database that we're looking to work with, in this case, AdventureWorks BI. And you'll see in the bottom area of the screen here that I can actually be quite specific about what I want to include in the diagram. But to give us an overall picture, I'm going to go ahead and select everything and add that selection to the project. And there you see it. All of a sudden, we know exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so maybe there's a little bit too much information here for us right now. So one of the things we could do, if it was going to help, was to actually change the format. And SQL Dependency Tracker has lots of different layout schemes, but it really is too much for us, so we're going to have to narrow it down. So Naomi mentioned the sales information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over here to the search box and enter sales. And this will quickly allow me to narrow it down to the ones I'm looking for. Sales order header seems like a sensible starting point. And you see that it highlights it on the diagram for us. We can actually zoom in here and look at the object itself and then track the relationships using these colour-coded paths. But what I'm actually going to do, just to get right back to basics, is I'm going to invert that selection and get rid of everything else. So now we have something that's much more simple to understand. It doesn't give us a lot of information. But SQL Dependency Tracker is quite dynamic in the fact that I can now right-click on this object. First of all, actually, I'm just going to expand this up so we can see what this object's made up of. So we've got all the column names listed there. And I can right-click on this and add objects to the project based upon this as our starting reference point. So if I add objects to selection uses, and then reapply this layout, so in the centre of the screen there, I can now see all of the objects that have a relationship with our sales order header table. So let's have a look and see what we've got. We can review all of these. Obviously, I'm looking for, it's the country that we're looking for in this relation, so I want something location related. And in our address table there, I can see we've got the state province. So that's likely our next most sensible step. So let's select those two, invert the selection and get rid of everything else. And that's our first step on our path to actually locating the information that we're looking for. So I could repeat this process over and over again, traversing the objects and the relationships until I find our end point. But I think we've already done it before.
I have, yes. So if we continue using this tool and then discovering the different tables, we will end up having something like this one here. I think I went the bigger one, but it's okay. So we end up having all of the tables that we need for our project. So if I'm just, I like the other one. So I have, if we repeat that process, obviously there are many different ways that we can actually approach this, but this is one of them. So if you continue that process, you could identify all of the different tables that are related to those dimensional tables and this information. So the good thing about this is that I can actually print this out and have it on my desk when I'm trying to build something, so I already know all of the tables that I need for my project. So the good thing is that I have identified the relationship between all of the tables, where they are, what their name is, what columns they have, and it's all available to me to actually start coding. I think I'm actually ready to start coding.
Ready to begin? Okay. Well, before we do, I just want to make a quick note, really. At this point, we need to decide, we need to make a decision on how we're actually going to implement our solution. Now, there's lots of ways that you can do this, and we're going to cover these in more depth later on, but these are three options here. The point that we're going to make at this time is that we're actually going to move away from using embedded SQL and instead move towards using stored procedures. So there's a couple of advantages to this. First of all, it gives us much greater visibility, which again we're going to talk about later. But if our logic is stored on the SQL server rather than wrapped up within our package, then all the other developers that are working with the database can actually see what we're doing. They have it available to them, and we can work together on the ultimate solution. The other advantage to this approach is, of course, we're able to make use of the tools that are designed for SQL Server developers to help us along the way, to help us implement our solution. So the first thing that we need to do, as any good developer knows, we need to get our solution under source control. Now, source control is nothing new to application developers, and it's becoming much more widely used by SQL database developers since the release of SQL source control. It's made it much simpler and much easier. And we don't think there's any reason why that can't apply to business intelligence developers either. So SQL source control acts as a bridge really between your existing source control system and Management Studio, and allows you to interact with it from within your development environment. So do you want to get yourself set up?
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Management Studio, and I'm going to add to source control both my AdventureWorks BI database, which is my staging database, and then data warehouse, which is actually my data warehouse where I want to actually put my my data map, sorry. So if I right-click on AdventureWorks BI, I link database to source control. I have different options of source control systems that I can use. For this demo, we're going to use the evaluation. So I'm going to create a new repository, create. And because this is my local copy of the database, I'm going to just select dedicated database. So I link to source control. Now the next step, because this database already has objects in it, I need to do the initial commit into source control. So I'm going to commit my changes. So I'm going to say starting point and commit. And now I have my database and all of the objects within that database into source control. Now the next step is I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the demo data warehouse. And again, I'm going to use the evaluation version and create a new repository. And I'm going to use the dedicated database. And in this case, because the demo data warehouse is empty, I don't need to actually do an initial commit because it doesn't have any objects yet. Now, hopefully, you all using bits, and you hopefully will have also source control in your package. We will not be demoing this on this particular session, but hopefully you have that as well in source control. So now I think I have everything prepared for the next step, Tom.
Excellent. Isn't it nice to have that everything's safe? You have a way out. So if we just pop back to our slides quickly here. The next step in the process really for us is going to be coding. We've looked at discoverability, which has been improved by using SQL Dependency Tracker. We've also looked at SQL source control as a way of versioning everything, and it's an integrated solution, so it's not something that we have to leave where we're accustomed to doing our work to actually get our scripts under source control. When it comes to coding, I understand this is an area where we really do need some help. So this is not something that I do myself, business intelligence development, but Naomi tells me that there's not a lot in terms of help. There's not a lot in the way of IntelliSense. There's nothing to help you as you're actually creating these things. But by actually storing the logic on the SQL Server, we can now make use of tools like SQL Prompt and SQL Search. So SQL Prompt is our automatic completion tool, very similar to an IntelliSense kind of tool. But it's actually got a lot more functionality to it on top of that. So you've got automatic suggestion of join conditions and column pickers. can really do so much. There's far too much in SQL Comp for us to show you in just an hour today, but hopefully we'll highlight a few areas. And SQL Search is one of your personal favourites, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I shall let you tell people about
My
that.
second favourite, but you'll see which one is my first one in a second. So I'm going to start my coding. So before I actually start, I wrote some store procedures created from home. So I'm just going to drop them here and run them so we can actually have the demo completely done. Bear with me for a second. So all I'm running here is actually creating some schema roles in both databases, creating some store procedures that will allow me to get the rest of the information like the product categories and the sales territory and all of them. And just bear with me for a second. And done. So now I've created all of the objects, some of the objects already. You probably didn't see that because it was quite quick, but we'll do one together. So the first thing I need to do is I go into my my Business Intelligence Development Studio project, and I open my package. I have already implemented part of the workflow here, but we are going to build the country dimension workflow. So I open this up, and the first thing we have in here is actually we have 3 different options in here to select the information we need from the country. We can select a table. The only problem with this is actually need to browse in here, and if you have loads of tables in databases, it can take a little bit of time. The second option could be, the second option is I can actually go in here and type my query, so select something, and as you can see, I've got the best intelligence in the world. And then the next step would be actually to put that logic back into Management Studio. So I go back to Management Studio, and the first thing I need to do is actually identify the country table. But I am a lazy developer, so if I have a tool that can help me do certain things a little bit quicker, I will make use of that. So I'm going to go to SQL Search. Using Dependency Tracker, I already know which tables I need, so I'm going to search for it in here. So I know I need country. So already have all different objects that have country in them. So I'm going to filter by tables. Now, did I type country? Sorry, wrong database. There we go. So I can see my table in here. So if I double click, it's going to select it in the object straight away, so I don't actually have to browse it to find it. So I'm going to right click, select the top 1,000 rows. Now I have my table in here that I'm looking for, which is my dimension table. Because of my particular needs of this example, I don't need the modified date because I'm going to assume that countries don't change, and if they did, I don't care what the past name was. I'm going to remove this information. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to add a checksum. So if for whatever reason the name of the country will change, it will detect that change, update that row, but not necessarily keep history of it. So even though you might not notice, what you're seeing here as a suggestion is actually SQL prompt helping me. So I'm going to select country region code and name as the 2 combination that it needs to be checking for if it has been changed. And I'm going to call this as hash, if I can type, yeah. So again, I run, correct, it has the result I need. So the next thing, because I'm really picky with indenting, I'm going to have that to be formatted for me. So now I've got the query. Again, I could then go back to my package and put it here. The problem of doing this is that no one knows that I'm querying this information. So any of the other developers, either database developer or BI developers, don't know that I'm using this table. So if something happens, no one will know. So instead of doing this, I'm going to create a store procedure. So again, I'm going to use SQL prompt feature in this case. In this case, I'm going to encapsulate this as new store procedure, and it will generate the information, this syntax for me. So in this case, it's going to be cubes, which is the name of the schema that I created it earlier, and then get next view script. So now it generates a script, so I can make sure that I'm in the correct database. I'm going to remove this particular section here because I'm not interested in having that. And I run this store procedure, and now it's available to me, so I can actually fold this up into Management Studio. So if I page this up, columns, I've got my columns, everything is fine. Now what I'm doing in here is a lookup table. So if the data exists in the destination table, then and the country hasn't been modified, then it shouldn't do anything. But if it needs to compare the data that comes from my staging database to the data that is actually in the demo data warehouse. So to do that, I need a destination table. Because I prepared these before, it believes that the table already exists, but actually I haven't created it yet. So I'm going to use this new button here to create the table. I'm going to select the schema geo, which is the one that I created for the geographical information in the demo data warehouse, and I'm going to call this countries. Now, when I click OK, it will create the table in the correct database, but I'll get a lovely error, which we can actually ignore, and select the country in here. So now I click OK, and now I've done the lookup. The next thing is actually to insert the table into, so if it's a new row, it should be inserted into the destination table. So I'm going to make sure that all of the mappings are correct. I'm just missing the hash. Okay. And then the other one is a conditional split. Now, what I'm interested in, sorry, this is what happens when you do have the package ready before now. Bear with me for a second. The old hash that already should have been populated into the destination table. If I come back here, again go to my conditional split, and the case is thank you very much. Actually, if I can type correctly. There we go. Okay. So if the hash is the same, it's going to go to the trust destination. This trust destination component is free. You can download it from SQLlist.com. And the good thing is you can actually see the workflow, so you could actually add a data grid here to be able to see what rows are actually going to that destination. And the other one would be if the country has been modified to update that row. So in here, again, we have the best intelligence in the world available to us inside here, as you can see. So you have two options here. You can write the update command directly in here, which I strongly suggest you don't. But if you did, what you get on the other end is when you do the column mapping, you don't get suggestions of the names. So if you have 15 columns, you will get parent 1, parent 2, parent 3, parent 4, and you would need to remember in which order you put them to be able to map them to the column names. So by using install procedures, we get the suggestions of the variables, so we can actually map them by name, which is much user-friendly. Otherwise, let me just do this one. So now I have my package completely done. So let's run it the first time. So everything should go to insert new rows, hopefully, and temporary. If I run it again, everything should go to the trust destination. Voila. So the other example I need is actually to modify the country. So if I go back to Management Studio and I go to this table and edit the top to 100. So I'm going to rename Andorra. If anyone from here is from Andorra, I'm sorry, it's just an example. I always pick on Andorra. So I'm going to call this República, if I can type, República Andorra, because they decide to change the name. And if I go back to my package and I run again, I should see one row coming this way. So if I execute again, voila. So all green, I've tested my package, all of the different flows actually do the same thing, and all of my logic is in SQL Server. So theoretically, I should now be ready to commit. But before I do that, I do want to show you this. How many of you have been working, long hours in front of Management Studio, and suddenly your computer breaks or the Management Studio closes and you lose everything? How many of you? And you swear at the screen and everything, yeah? I do have that. Well, I did have that. So I have a tool. So you see that I've got a few tabs open, yeah? I haven't saved anything. All of them have been created on the fly. said, yeah, all of them. Particularly this one has not been saved. I'm going to close Management Studio. So normally, in a normal scenario, because I've just lost all of the queries I've been working on for so long. So if I open a Management Studio now, the good thing is that all of them are going to be back. And that's a tool called SQL Tab Magic. It's in beta at the moment. It's free, so you can download it and have it for free. You can search for it on the Redgate website. And the good thing about this one, which I definitely love, I mean, SQL probably and SQL Search are my 2 and 3rd, depending on the day, but this one definitely is a time saver. So the good thing is that not only brings them back, but actually you can search from the ones that you closed recently. How many times you closed one of those windows that you thought you didn't need anymore, and then realized I needed that one back. So in here it remembers what you recently closed, so you can actually see which one is the one that I needed to open, so it will remember for you. And also if you have, like me, 27 tabs open, you would also be able to click in here and search. So I could search for country and it will tell you which tab that is. So you could actually browse around. I know, whoa, yes. So you can actually tap around. Yay! Best tool ever. So you can actually find them in here quite nicely. So that's my top 1 favorite tool, and it's free. So please download it and have it. SQL Tab Magic. I haven't quite used it, but they're working on it. I think the important is the tool, not necessarily the name, but SQL Tab Magic. So I think I've done all of the development for this particular package. So I'm going to expand my databases. So my next step is actually putting everything that I've done into source control. So I'm going to right-click my AdventureWorks BI, commit changes to source control, and it's going to highlight all of the different objects that I've modified since the start of this demo, really. And I can actually check what they are, what they look like, what the script is going to be run. So if I say ready for release, and I commit this in, now my changes are safely in source control. And the same I'm going to do with demo data warehouse. Again, I can check that I've done the correct things. I can check my script, so everything's fine. So ready for release. Commit. And done. So hopefully you will do exactly the same thing for this and commit your changes into source control. And I think, hold on, this is the best part. I think I'm ready for my pint of
It's very presumptuous. I'd just like to say you've made someone very happy. For the last 2 months, I've had really to talk about magic. So it's excellent that I'm not so sure. I'm not convinced of it. We've spoken so far about a number of areas, but one thing that we've touched upon briefly, and I think we'll come back to, is visibility. So we've seen in a few instances how visibility has been improved by storing that logic on the SQL server. But let's delve into that a little bit deeper. So what would happen is, if as a SQL developer, one of my tasks for today was to rename the column. And perhaps that column was the name in the country region table. How would you feel about that? So if I come into my AdventureWorks database, I'm just going to quickly link this up to the same source control repository that you were using to bring down the latest version. Which is up there. Click link and get the latest version. So is this going to be the point where you shout?
Well, the thing is that probably I won't know until we break one of my packages and I have
Would
to
I
run around.
really?
Is it true?
So I'm going to come into my database now that I've got the latest version. I'm going to go through our tables, find our country region table, and I'm going to rename that column, the main column, rename that to country name. Of course I can't do that, can I? Because it's got dependencies. Fortunately, I do have SQL prompt installed, so I can use smart rename. And try that again. Country name, and SQL prompt will go ahead and write the script for me that will take care of the dependencies. So it will tell me what actions it's going to take, and any warnings, any dependencies, and all of a sudden I can see stop, get country. So I have got visibility of your school procedure. I can see when I'm about to do it. But perhaps I don't care. I'm just going to open the script and I'm just going to execute it and leave it to it and go to my point.
So normally, this is what would happen. So you would have your panic button, because normally what happens is when a developer makes a change that you're not aware of. Sorry, you cannot hear me. If you cannot hear me, just shout or say something. There you go. So normally we would actually be quite upset, because we normally find out when it's too late to we actually have to panic around, fix it quickly, and literally run around and panic and sweating. So the good thing about having everything in source control is, first, it gives him or the developer's visibility. It's in source control, so I could bring those changes down and have them for my next release and make the changes to the packages before it actually makes it live, makes it to production, which is quite a different thing. So I remember a few years ago, before I used source control, literally running in panic when a package fails and suddenly your queues are not refreshing and everyone is running around. Oh, where's my data? Where's my data? You don't even know where to start. So the good thing is, having this, you can actually have all of that visibility, not only towards the developers but also in your direction as well. So theoretically, we should be ready for this.
Okay, I'll go with that now. So at this point, it comes to what's perhaps the most monotonous part of the story. When it comes to deployment, we have to prepare the scripts for the release team. We have to get everything ready and script everything out and make sure all the changes are covered. Now that's not something that's particularly fun to do. But with SQL Compare, you don't have to do it. SQL Compare can handle that side of it for you. Now SQL Compare is obviously one of our flagship tools. I can see a lot of red lanyards, which means that you're already Redgate tools users. How many of you are actually already using SQL Compare? Okay, so it's good to see. So you'll be quite familiar with this, but I'm actually going to let Naomi go ahead and complete the deployment anyway, just to show you the full process right through to the end.
So when it comes to preparing the changes for the release, normally you would prepare your package with the configuration to actually put it in production. Normally your documentation, and the next thing would be creating all of the scripts for your schema changes. So we're going to do this incredibly easy. If you haven't used SQL Compare, this would make your life very easy. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually from Management Studio, right-click, schema compare deploy, and I'm going to set this as the source. So the source being the version that I committed last, so the latest version that I have developed. And as a destination, I'm going to select the version that we actually created earlier at the beginning of the demo. So I'm going to go to starting point. And this is going a little bit to the other side. There you go. So I'm going to select that one. And now I'm going to compare and deploy with SQL Compare. This will open up SQL Compare. And we probably can put a little bit of music. There you go. Compare now. And it will show all of the different changes that happened between the two of them. It will show me all of the different objects that have changed, what have changed. I can actually review all of the different scripts that would be generated. So I'm going to select all of the objects, and I'm going to go to synchronization wizard. This will generate the script for me, so I can actually have everything that is required for the schema changes, and I can save this script into my release folder. Hopefully it's got a different name, yeah. Which I would have my package and my configuration files and my documentation, so I can actually pass these on to the release team or the testers team for them to learn. So something that used to be incredibly complicated before, because you needed to remember what you had changed. Now it's just 2 clicks away, so I think now we have finished. And I want my point.
So there we have it, really. We've gone all the way from initial investigation through to actually deploying the end product. And this was all with the help of tools within the SQL Developer Bundle. So Discoverability was assisted by SQL Dependency Tracker. Versioning, we used our SQL Source Control tool. Coding was a combination, really, of SQL Search and SQL Prompt. Visibility as a whole has been improved by the approach that we take by storing the logic within the SQL server. And then finally, the deployment stage was as simple as a few clicks using SQL Compare. So I hope after seeing some of the things that you've seen today, and of course SQL Tab Magic. SQL Tab Magic. So I hope after seeing some of the things that you've seen today, you'll agree with me that perhaps the SQL Developer Bundle does not necessarily have to be just the SQL Developer Bundle, but maybe the BI Developer Bundle as well. So thank you all very much for listening today.